The NFL, it's more than a game, right? It's a massive part of American culture. Every Sunday, we see these incredible athletes on the field. But if you look over at the sidelines, you start to see a picture that's, well, a lot more complicated. So let's get right into it.
And really, this whole thing boils down to a number that you just can't ignore. Look at the players on the field. The league is majority black. But then look at who's leading them from the sidelines. Totally different story. And we're not talking about a small gap here. It's a huge chasm, right? A disconnect between who's playing the game and who gets trusted with the keys to the franchise.
So, yeah, that leads us right to the big question we're trying to unpack here. Why? I mean, how can this massive gap exist in what's arguably one of America's most powerful institutions? To really get our heads around that, we've got to look back. Way back.
And look, this is not a new problem by any stretch. If you really want to understand what's happening today, you have to dig into the history. And it's a history that's marked by some really long stretches, periods of exclusion that were frankly often very intentional.
Okay, so check this out, because the scale of this gap is pretty wild. You have Fritz Pollard, a true pioneer, becoming the first black head coach way back in 1921. But right after him, that door just slammed shut for nearly 7 decades. Think about that. It wasn't until 1989, that Art Shell finally broke through that barrier. That's a 68-year stretch with 0 black head coaches, even while the league was integrating on the field. This wasn't some kind of accident, it was a pattern.
And what we're seeing here is a perfect example of something academics call positional segregation. It's a fascinating idea. It basically means that even when the doors start to open for players of color, the most important, central leadership-type roles, think quarterback on the field or head coach on the sideline, those roles somehow stay off-limits.
So fast forward to 2003. The NFL decides it needs to do something, and they introduce this landmark policy you've probably heard of, the Rooney Rule. On paper, it sounded great, but as we're about to see, the reality was, well, it turned out to be a pretty imperfect solution.
And at first, it really looked like it was working. The rule said teams had to interview at least one minority candidate, and boom, by 2011, the league hit a high point with 8 black head coaches, 25% of the league. But then, look what happened. A complete nosedive, a staggering regression. By 2022, that number craters back down to just 3. So that begs the question, right? Was the rule actually changing minds, or had it just become a box for teams to check off?
In this quote right here, it gets to the absolute heart of the criticism. This is from the lawsuit filed by Coach Brian Flores, where he basically alleged that some teams were conducting sham interviews, just going through the motions to check the Rooney Rule box, even though they'd already decided who they were going to hire. For the people making the decisions, it can feel less risky to just stick with who you know, with the familiar faces. And just like that, a rule designed to create a real opportunity gets turned into just a formality.
So, if a big, formal rule isn't fixing the problem, what does that tell you? It tells you the problem runs way, way deeper. We're not just talking about a flawed process here. We're talking about a whole web of systemic barriers, things that aren't written down in any rulebook.
Right. It's never just one thing. It's more like this complex ecosystem where everything is interconnected. You've got unconscious thoughts playing a role, social networks, even completely different standards for different people. And all these things, they weave together to create this really powerful disadvantage for black coaching candidates. So let's break a few of the big ones down.
Okay, first up, implicit bias. We all have it. It's basically the unconscious shortcuts our brains make without us even realizing it. And the research on this is fascinating. It shows that people, the media, decision makers, they often describe white coaching candidates with words like cerebral or strategic mastermind. But black candidates, they're more often called great motivators or disciplinarians. See the difference? It subtly frames one group as the thinkers, the brains of the operation, and the other as the enforcers. And guess who gets the edge when you're hiring for the top job?
Then there's this other concept called homophily. It sounds complicated, but it's a really simple and powerful idea. We tend to hire people who are like us. That's just human nature. So in a league where the owners and general managers are overwhelmingly white, who do you think they're most comfortable with? It just naturally creates this old boy network that helps out white candidates who come from similar backgrounds, have similar connections. And that makes it incredibly tough for anyone on the outside to break in.
And this next one is huge, shifting standards. When you look at the actual data, it's pretty clear. Black coaches often get a much shorter leash. They're fired quicker, and this is the really crucial part, they get way fewer second chances than their white counterparts, even if those coaches have similar or sometimes even worse records.
Yeah, people sometimes call it the 1 strike versus 3 strikes dynamic. It
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? A black coach might get one single shot to prove they belong, while a white coach often gets multiple chances, multiple jobs, to finally find success.
Okay, so when you put all these barriers together, you can end up with something that lawyers call disparate impact. Let's look at this hypothetical. Let's say the hiring process looks totally fair on paper, right? No discriminatory rules. But then you look at the results. The hiring rate for black applicants is only half the rate for white applicants. When you see a process that consistently spits out an unequal result like that, it's a massive red flag. It tells you the system itself is creating a discriminatory outcome, whether anyone meant for it to or not. But behind all this data, all these academic terms, there are real people, real coaches with real careers and families. And these systemic barriers, they have a very, very real human cost.
I mean, look at this comparison. It's the perfect illustration of those shifting standards we were just talking about. On one hand, you have Mike Tomlin. The guy is a pillar of stability and success. He started his career with an unprecedented 15 straight seasons without a losing record. Then on the other hand, you have Brian Flores. He gets fired by the Dolphins after putting together 2 winning seasons in a row, something that franchise had been desperate for. You've got 2 successful black coaches and 2 completely different outcomes. It's stark.
But it's not all bleak. There are these really powerful examples of what progress can actually look like. Take Tony Dungy. He was the first black head coach to win a Super Bowl, and he essentially created his own network. His success, his mentorship, it directly led to head coaching jobs for guys like Lovie Smith, Mike Tomlin, and Jim Caldwell. People call it the Dungy tree, and it just goes to show that when black coaches get into those positions of power, they can create those same pathways for others. It has this incredible multiplier effect.
But probably the single biggest structural barrier facing the league today is what's known as the coordinator bottleneck. Here's the deal. The pipeline to becoming a head coach almost always runs through a coordinator job, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And when you look at the numbers here, the problem just jumps right out at you. Black coaches make up a really solid chunk of position coaches, about a third. But then that number gets sliced by more than half when you get to that crucial offensive coordinator spot.
And then as of February 2025, that number became even more unbelievable. 0. At that point in time, there were 0 black offensive coordinators in the entire National Football League. This isn't just a pipeline that's gotten narrow. For so many qualified coaches, it's completely blocked.
And that brings us right back to where we started, to this central dilemma. We've looked at the history, we've looked at the attempts to fix it with policy, and we've dug into these deep, systemic barriers. And it all boils down to one fundamental question. If a policy, even a well-intentioned one like the Rooney Rule, isn't enough, then what will it take to truly, finally level the playing field on the sidelines of the NFL?